Hey, and welcome to Roll for Insight, where we chat with our geek therapist about all things geeky happening in the world. Today, we're chatting with Alicia, and specifically, we're going to pin it down to questions about AI as it pertains to therapy. So, Alicia, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm excited. This will be fun.
So, we're going to just dive right in there. The first question I have for you is when people say like AI therapy, what are they actually talking about? And like what crucial elements of real therapy get flattened or misunderstood in that conversation?
Whew, off the bat, here we go. Okay, so that's difficult, right? Because when people are talking about AI therapy, and we're going to put that in quotes,
Yeah,
AI therapy,
yeah.
they're usually pointing to some sort of AI tool or model that's offering a bit of conversation, reflection, mood tracking, some psychoeducation, or like a coping prompt that allows them to feel therapeutic in that. And often that misunderstanding is treating these supports as equivalent to in person or virtual therapy with a therapist.
Mm,
And rather than using tools in this area that lack like a real world therapeutic relationship with a therapist, they are flattening accountability, clinical responsibility, how that relationship is built, the skills, the goals that go in reciprocal language and communication styles in I don't want to say real world, but
hmm.
real time therapy with an individual therapist that an AI therapy doesn't offer.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that does not offer is like a real person absorbing the information. And so, like, I want to bring it to that nervous system perspective. What's missing when emotional support is delivered by an algorithm instead of like a regulated human relationship, which is already what you were just speaking to?
Yeah, that's really hard and also an interesting conversation piece to have because, from a nervous system's perspective, what is missing, in my opinion, and of course, this is my opinion as a provider and as an educator, is co regulation. Because
Mm,
a person to person therapeutic relationship, there is subtle bidirectional skills that are
hmm.
used for safety, and that is used to help regulate the tone that an individual has, the pacing, facial expressions, micro repairs, and things
Mm,
that kind of embody the presence of that space for another person is part of that nervous system perspective when looking at clinical approaches in real time therapy. And I
mhm.
don't think that an algorithm or an AI model can really mirror that. I don't think that AI models produce that in person skill that is given. It doesn't produce safety mechanisms. It sure as hell doesn't produce ethical measures in a clinical space. And it can't offer lived rational feedback. That's just the truth. And for the nervous system, we need that because we need to understand how to re-regulate something that's dysregulated and
Mhm.
fixing that dysregulated nervous system. And that can only be done with trust, recognition of a therapist and the client needing those services
Mhm.
and building through that. And oftentimes it's subtle and it takes a while. It just doesn't happen overnight. And
Yeah.
AI algorithms, I don't believe can do that.
Yeah. You mentioned like sharing space and specifically even holding space with another person. Um, when someone consistently uses AI as a replacement rather than a supplement, can you talk about how that like crucial space holding aspect, like literally taking up space with somebody, going back and forth with them, what happens to that exactly?
A computer can't take up the space of a human mind and human response and human emotion and interaction. Clinicians are not just someone on the side of a desk or the other side of a computer screen or someone on the other side of a couch emotionless. They're not emotionless people. I'm not emotionless. My colleagues are not emotionless. An AI model or someone seeking out AI quote unquote therapy isn't going to have that same relationship because there is nothing reciprocal about that. And I'm not quite sure if that answers your question in its entirety, but clients
It
need
does.
to have reciprocal conversation. There needs to be levels, and trust is created in levels, and
Mhm.
diving deep into a clinical need or a goal or a processing space
Mhm.
is so much more than what a model or AI therapy can provide. And it's hard because what does holding space mean? That's
Mhm.
really what we have to define. Like, what does that mean to hold space? Is it Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo grabbing each other's nails? Because that's what the world sees, right? We see that
Right.
as holding space. But what we don't understand is that space in between is what a clinician is creating and holding in a bubble. Whereas if an AI model gets an input for me that says, I am struggling with complex PTSD due to my time in the military service, help me deal with that. It's just going to regurgitate stuff from Wikipedia. And that's not going to provide safe, ethical space. That is just an algorithm pumping out your prompt with some information that may or may not be accurate, ethically sound, or even real.
Mhm.
So
Even
holding
applicable.
space is difficult. Or yeah, correct, or even applicable. So holding space and what does that mean is a very dynamic space, especially funny, right? Holding space, dynamic space. Especially when you're looking at what that means to create space,
Mhm.
arrive at that space, and then have a human always holding that space for you when you are not in treatment weekly. Like that's always there for
Yeah.
you. Holding space for some people that I work with is they know every Tuesday at 4 o'clock they have a place that they can be if they can make it. And that is their session time. And then in that I have brain space for them for their
Mhm.
therapeutic journey, their treatment plan. So it's difficult. It's really hard to understand and rationalize that if you are not classically trained to know how to create, maintain, and hold that in a very
Mhm.
classical approach.
I think where we're going, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, it's like where we're kind of going with this conversation is we're bringing back into the forefront like what it means to have person to person relationships. And you
Yeah.
think after the pandemic that that would be something, on the forefront of everyone's mind, really, like, what does it mean to be in person?
Uh,
Who do you think is being most encouraged or, like, quietly pushed towards AI therapy instead of human care? Can you speak to, like, what that says about access, being able to access, a therapist?
ooh, that's tough, right? Because a therapist, the goal of therapy is to come in, meet your goal, and then graduate.
Mhm,
We don't come into therapy to keep clients. We come into therapy to graduate clients. And many of us will say that we hope that our job is not needed. So the people that I think who are being quietly pushed to AI and AI therapy models
mhm,
are already marginalized people groups and populations who are marginalized by the system. I mean, that goes down to people who are folks who have limited resources, like limited
mhm,
income, individuals who are put on long wait lists to see someone, people who have chronic illness, individuals who have disabilities, rule and are isolated, people who have identities that are historically underserved and in underpopulated spaces by mental health and even medical health. And
mhm,
so it's a shift, right? And I think the shift says less about innovation and more about power. And I
mhm,
know that that's going to rub some people the wrong way, but I really think that those who are suffering are not seen as worthy of time,
mhm,
labor, relationships. People who are seen to have socioeconomic access and relief have more worth assigned to them. So I think, in my own opinion, of course, and I can't back this up by data or research, but I believe
mhm,
that those who are not seen as good enough are the people who AI therapy is targeting because it's a cheaper automated service that if an individual doesn't know what it is, they think, "Oh, AI therapy actual artificial intelligence therapy for $20 a session, okay, that means I can finally get help. I can
Mhm.
afford $20 or I can afford $10. But they don't know that they're being targeted because somebody somewhere created a model that I believe saw them as less. That's not everybody's opinion. And I have to be very
Mhm.
clear about that. That is my opinion. It is my opinion that those who are targeted to AI modeled therapy are individuals who are already marginalized by a system that doesn't really look at them as worthy.
Sure. Absolutely. That makes total sense. Pinning it as this kind of very ethical, easily accessible version, and it comes from, like, the lack of knowledge, as you were speaking to earlier, like, they don't know everything that goes in on the back end, let's say, of, like, being a therapist. They don't know what's being lost in the depersonalization of that interaction.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunate and it's a sickness within our system. And it's not fair. It is not fair that people are seen as less worthy and with the inability to find resources. And AI
Mhm.
therapy is, I think, picking that up and they know who to target.
For sure, for sure. What ethical red flags do you see emerging as AI tools begin positioning themselves as therapists or mental health substitutes?
Oh, that's so hard. Can we break it down into a few questions so it's not a
Yes,
lot? Is that
yes,
easier?
of course, absolutely. So let's say you kind of already covered this, like you're online and you see the chat bot that literally says therapist next to it. I've seen this, the therapist chat bots. Do
Yeah.
you foresee any kind of red flags in terms of data, personal sharing personal things? There's no, like, ethical code of conduct, is there?
Oh, this is so hard because it's ethical boundaries and me are really big. Um, and I'm gonna see if I can find, I was gonna see if I could pull up something from my own ethical, guidelines for my own agency or not my agency, but for my licensing body, but
Mhm,
I think it'll
mhm,
take too long. But to answer your question, I just had this conversation with some of our staff today. A major ethical red flag right now is,
mhm.
like you said, therapist chat box, and then opening that up and having a conversation with it. Because if you are a layman, you don't know what is on the other side of that. Someone in my field, we know that that is an AI generated model answering those questions for you. And we all use them. If you have a clinical practice, a shoe store, a storefront, we're all using conversation bots so you can get the correct information to contact who you need to, right?
Right, right.
And so, even at Geek Therapeutics, if you contact us after hours, you get a drop down menu. And that drop down menu connects you to who you need to email or phone call. That is not the same thing at all. And so I have some major ethical red flag issues with platforms like this that are using that chat feature or a AI model. And I'm just going to be real clear and come out about it right now. Calm and other similar digital tools for mindfulness, audio, like Apple Music, Spotify,
Mhm,
other digital services that are providing communication or music are creating these self assessments and having you complete self assessments to then be provided a vague, non clinical response of one like, you might benefit from dot, dot, dot statements. And they feel like they may be diagnostic statements, but they're not. And so they say you may like or you may benefit from X, Y, and Z because you offered up information about yourself that is not even talked about with a human and a clinician who can actually talk about some of these things. And
mhm.
right now, there's an ADHD um, like ad going around that if you see these four colors and you see all four of them, and in the center you see blah, that means you don't have ADHD. Excuse me, what? That is
What?
not a diagnostic criteria of ADHD to see a blob of colors.
Yeah.
That to me is a massive red flag. Recently, Calm has a self assessment out that you take a self assessment about sleeping. You can tell Calm that you do not have a hard time falling asleep at all. You can tell them that 6 or 7 or 8 times. And at the end of that self assessment, regardless of if you say, yes, I have an issue sleeping, or no, I don't have an issue sleeping, they are generating an information prompt that states you may benefit from EMDR style audio files.
Oh, that's
EMDR is an
so deeply
it absolutely is deeply problematic and unethical. And because you're giving away things like EMDR, that like ADHD and that like autism and the words testing and diagnosis are buzzwords right now in social media. They're all over
yeah,
our social feeds.
yeah.
And so that is a red flag because to me, again, Alicia, not indicative of Geek Therapeutics, not indicative of anybody else that I work with or work in conjunction with. My opinion, professionally and personally, is that it has no accountability. There is no accountability when apps offer EMDR style audio, color pattern exposure assessments, or claims that suggest you don't have ADHD or that you might sleep better with EMDR style audio.
Mhm.
That is an absolute blur of psychoeducation, clinical diagnostic materials, and mindfulness.
Yeah.
I believe that is completely and ethically and morally wrong. They have, in that red flag, they have absolutely skipped consent,
Mm,
informed consent to have that, the idea and understanding of differential diagnoses, clinical oversight, while influencing others that they and their users and anybody else that user has a connection to, they
mhm.
are pushing and influencing people to have a better understanding of their mental health through their AI generated risk self assessment materials.
Assessments. Yeah.
And that's a huge red flag for me. They're pushing authority without responsibility, and
Very,
that is a problem.
very slowly creeping up on the authority line with it's known now as like therapy speak. We see people using therapy speak and like their relationships and how that can be used, just out of alignment with the integrity that it should be.
Absolutely.
And isn't EMDR, shouldn't that even be done, like, in the presence of a trained professional as far as I'm aware? Because it's like biohacking, which everybody is kind of onto now. It's like you're really doing some things to your, like, physiology, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
actually, you are. So it's like,
Yeah.
hmm.
I was talking with one of our providers today who is not an EMDR trained specialist, but we do a lot of EMDR style work.
Mm,
And we were talking about how you want to talk about falling asleep to EMDR audio? You could begin to have these lucid nightmares that you have no control over because EMDR has a very specific rhythmic
yeah,
pattern to
there it is.
create like neuroplasticity and the nervous system to be open and accepting to a style of therapeutic treatment.
Yes.
And that is just like you just hit it on the head. And you really start to mess with the nervous system when you start to implement things that you do not understand, and that is problematic.
Wow, that alone, implementing things that you don't understand, that's actually a great platform for why AI chatbot therapy should really be closely looked at because it crosses those borders and those
Yeah.
boundaries. Like for example, if you're not aware of the benefits of human to human in-person therapy, how can AI unintentionally reinforce avoidance or unintentionally reinforce emotional bypassing rather than like real integration?
Yeah, that's hard because that becomes cultural, right? It becomes clinical at that time because there's all these additional factors. And so healing cannot be treated as optimized. It's not a Dungeons and Dragons character. It's not a a BG3 character. We're not playing a simulation in Sims, right?
Mm,
And so when we treat healing that can be automized, automated or optimized, we
gotcha.
lose a shared value of communication, of reciprocal learning, of learning about myself while having to activate and actively share and express what's going on. And so I also
Wow,
think that
that's huge alone, like what you just said. Like that's huge alone.
think think when we think about what is deserving of time and presence and relationship, I believe that therapy is one of them. And not because it's my profession, but because I believe that there is a space for the collective storytelling and communication that happens in therapy. Whether you
Mm,
are working through the death of a parent or domestic violence or you're learning executive functioning skills, that is a collective story of your life that you are sharing with a person. And that person then starts to value what you are and who and where you live and what that biopsychosocial looks like of your entire makeup. And to
mhm.
me, that deserves my time. That deserves me being present. And that deserves the therapeutic relationship that we're building, not efficiency. I don't believe that automation can do that. Automation creates efficiency.
There it is.
And so it's hard because what do you value? Do you value quiet regulation over meaningful repair? Do you
Mm,
value productivity over personhood or convenience over care? Right? Because if we're looking at
yeah,
who's being
yeah.
targeted back in AI therapy model, what do you value? And how are you as a person who is seeking out services? How are you needing to be provided for? And how do you need something or someone to value you? And I just don't think that it can be managed by an artificial
Mhm,
intelligence model at all.
mhm.
I think it has to be held collectively, and I think that it needs to be held responsibly and with ethics and values and morals and ethical boundaries and a license. I think it needs to be held in that collective with a licensed mental health provider. And we
Yeah.
lose that. We lose that mutual and moral responsibility when we start to look into AI modeling and having AI models provide therapy for
Mhm.
individuals in need.
That was absolutely beautifully said. Absolutely beautifully said. So for our last question, right? Like all of that said, right? If AI does have a role in mental health at all, what is the healthiest, most ethical way for it to support therapy without replacing another human nervous system on the other side of the room? Because I believe we're being pushed to a point where we're being forced to reconcile with, we are made who we are through each other. You can't know who you are if not for somebody else apart from you, someone else across from you. That's how we come into who we are, right? So, in what way could it be used safely, if there's a way?
Typically, I don't think there's a safe way to institute artificial intelligence as a therapy substitute at all. I think that ethically, if we're using AI and AI modeling and AI generative prompting, I think that explicit boundaries are required. I
Mhm,
also believe that an AI model should not have any simulated diagnostic material in it. I don't believe that it should be able to pump out treatment care plans or material requested to therapize through the AI model. Just as legal lawyers have been able to stop generative AI from creating legal documentation for people seeking out legal care who were using ChatGPT to do that. And I think on the same side, clinically, that is what needs to be done. I do think, though, that there are good use cases for using AI models and generative AI like ChatGPT and other spaces to help with executive function. I think it's
Yeah.
really good for helping create scheduling, creating resource management buckets to show like you use this time and this time for this and this and this task, and
Yeah.
helping build that
Scheduling.
out for individuals with executive function. I also believe there are really great generative models that we've been using for decades to use for paper editing and helping with grammar for someone who may be dyslexic or someone who may have a processing disability and not be able to process things in a way that are fluid on paper, and then have apps like Grammarly
Mm.
scrub through it and help them build their voice, help them use a grammar check, a spell check, a fluency check, because it does that. And I think that is awesome. I do think there are many, many programs that use APIs and widgets and generative models to help with that. But I do not believe that that is a substitute at all for a clinical relationship in therapy. I also think that AI can help reinforce techniques that you're
Mhm.
using and learning in therapy, and how to create better usage of your coping skills. But again, that's not a substitute for a person in a clinical session. I think that AI is really good for using journal prompting. I have had clients that it has helped them create a journal prompt about how they're feeling, and then they
Mm.
answer that, and then we talk about it in session. So I think that's a really great use case for supplemental usage to clinical
That
treatment.
makes sense. That makes total sense.
I just don't believe that AI has a place in individual service provisions, and I do not believe that it will ever, or should it ever, replace a provider, and I do not believe that it should be a single source virtual therapist. I just don't. But again, that's me personally. I know some therapists are using it to help with like backlogging of client usage. But I don't agree with things like Calm and other apps who are using self-assessments to create diagnosis panic, if that makes sense. I mean,
Mm.
someone says, "What do you mean? I don't see these colors. Does that mean I have ADHD?" What? No, you need to have a full battery of assessments that only a licensed professional who is certified in doing those tests. I'm not certified. I'm not going to tell you if you have ADHD or not. I'm going to refer you to one of
Right.
our referring partners to get tested. I don't think AI has a place in that. And I don't think I ever will agree that it does.
Totally. Thank you so much, Alicia, for joining me today and sharing your thoughts. This is a super hot topic, as you know, and I'm just grateful we had the time to sit down and chat about it, chat about the industry.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope that we get to have more of these role for chats, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like for role for insight in something else. But I hope that it's been insightful about the use of AI in therapeutic spaces, and for people to not feel like that AI has given you a diagnosis. If you feel you need to have an assessment done, please reach out to geektherapeutics.com, reach out to your own provider if you have one, and ask for that referral. Do not take an AI self assessment and allow them to diagnose you with or without a condition. It is better for you and way better for the rest of the world that everybody is using their own intuition to reach out to a provider and ask for an assessment. Sorry, that's my soapbox. I didn't mean to commandeer the last couple seconds of your show.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Bye.